The first time I heard my daughter-in-law scream that I was a crazy old witch who locked her out of her own home, I didn't flinch. I stood behind the curtain, silent, watching her rage on my porch, as if she owned every brick of this house. And in that moment, I knew tonight the whole neighborhood would discover which of us was truly insane. Before I go further, I'd love to know, what would you do if your own family turned on you like this? Drop your feelings in the comments below and tell me where you're watching from. I'm always amazed at the places this community gathers. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you won't miss the rest of this story. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 67 years old, a widow, and once upon a time I was an English teacher. Now, I am simply a mother standing at the center of a storm I never wanted but always feared would come. Melissa, my son, Daniel's wife, was outside pounding the iron gate as if she could break it down with her bare hands. Her voice was cracked from screaming, but still sharp enough to pierce the quiet of our Ohio cul-de-sac, where the loudest noise most days is a leaf blower or the church bells on Sunday. Sweat darkened her blouse, her hair stuck to her forehead in wild strands. She paced like a caged animal, every stomp a declaration of war. The neighbors came first as shadows behind blinds, then faces at windows, and finally, bodies shuffling closer. Mrs. Turner, 78, clutching her cane with one hand and her hunger for gossip with the other, led a small pack of retirees who looked both scandalized and thrilled. They whispered to each other, "Poor Melissa. Poor Daniel, how heartless Evelyn must be." I let them whisper. I let Melissa shriek. Because behind my locked door sat the truth page's numbers, photographs that none of them could yet imagine. Her tantrum grew uglier. She kicked at the tulips I'd planted, tearing petals from their stems. The flowers Daniel once picked for me every Mother's Day lay crushed under her heels. Each petal on the pavement was another small betrayal, a symbol of what she had already done to my family. From behind the curtain, my heart hammered like a war drum, but my face remained calm. They saw only a stubborn old widow barricading herself against her son and his young wife. They thought I was cruel, delusional, maybe even dangerous. But soon enough, when the door opened, they would all see the ledger, the proof, the betrayal. I wasn't hiding because I was guilty. I was hiding because I was patient. Tonight was not just about a lock on a door. Tonight I would unlock the lies Melissa had built her life upon, and the fallout would be louder than all her screaming combined. The pounding on the gate finally stopped, replaced by a deeper, heavier sound that made my stomach twist. Tires screeched against the pavement, and then the slam of a truck door split through the evening air like thunder. I didn't need to look. I knew that sound. My son Daniel was home. Melissa's shrieks shifted instantly into sobs, the kind that grated like nails across glass. I heard her heels clatter as she ran across the yard, and then her voice high, breaking, dripping with despair, wrapped around him like a noose. "Daniel, thank God you're here. Your mother has gone mad. She locked us out." Through the sliver of curtain, I saw her collapse against his chest, clutching his arm as though she might drown without him. She pointed toward my house with a trembling finger, the very picture of a wronged woman. Her cheeks flushed crimson, her eyes rimmed with tears, her whole body shaking in manufactured anguish. And Daniel, my Daniel, looked at her with such raw concern it stabbed me in the heart. His jaw tightened, his fists balled. I could almost hear the blood rushing in his ears. After 10 hours under the hood of broken cars, grease still under his nails, sweat staining his shirt, he had come home expecting peace. Maybe dinner, maybe laughter. Instead, his wife fed him a tragedy, and I was cast as the villain. The neighbors leaned closer, drawn by the heat of the scene. Mrs. Turner clucked her tongue. One of her friends whispered something about poor young people, while another shook her head at my drawn curtains. From behind the safety of glass, they condemned me silently. Daniel marched up the steps, his boots pounding like war drums. He hammered his fist against my door so hard I felt the vibration ripple through the frame. "Mom, open this door right now." His voice cracked like a whip, commanding, furious. The boy who once hid in my arms after nightmares now demanded entry like a soldier laying siege. My hand hovered over the knob, trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. I had imagined this moment 100 times, but nothing could soften the blow of hearing my son speak to me like I was a stranger, an enemy. Behind him, Melissa sobbed louder, ensuring every neighbor could hear her pitiful wail. "We've paid the bills for 3 years. We've lived here. This is our home. She's lost her mind." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. My instinct was to shout through the door, to hurl the truth at her lies, to remind my son of every sacrifice I had made. But I stayed silent, because timing mattered. A truth shouted in anger becomes just another noise. A truth delivered in calm cuts deeper than any scream. Through the window, I saw Daniel press his forehead against the door, his voice dropping raw and ragged. "Mom, please, don't do this. Just give us the keys. Don't humiliate us like this in front of everyone." That word humiliate burned through me, as if I was the one staging this theater, not the woman clawing at his arm and ripping tulips from the earth. The chorus of whispers swelled. Faces I'd known for decades, neighbors who'd shared cookouts, church services, 4th of July parades, were now judging me through narrowed eyes. To them, I was just an old widow unraveling. They didn't see the stack of bank statements in my desk, the photographs tucked into a manila envelope, the weight of secrets I had carried to protect the very sun, now pounding at my door. I took a long, steadying breath. Tonight was the line I could no longer postpone. My silence had shielded Daniel from the truth long enough. If I waited any longer, Melissa's performance would take root in every watching heart, and I would never undo it. My fingers brushed the cold brass knob. Slowly, deliberately, I turned it. The lock clicked open, a sound louder than any scream. I pulled the door back, the late lights spilling across the porch. Daniel's eyes met mine. For a heartbeat, he faltered. He had expected a woman wild with rage, maybe trembling with guilt. Instead, he found me calm, steady, almost serene, standing in my cream dress like I had dressed for this very confrontation. Melissa blinked, startled by the quiet strength she hadn't rehearsed for. "Daniel," I said softly, my voice carrying over the hush of the crowd, "I knew you would come." And in that moment, between my composure and Melissa's theatrics, the first crack appeared in her perfect performance. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, and I knew the battle had only just begun. Daniel stood frozen on the porch, Melissa clutching at his arm like a drowning woman. The neighbors had pressed closer, their murmurs swelling into a low tide of judgment. I could feel their stares prickling against my skin. For years, I had kept my silence, swallowing every insult, every suspicion, every ache of betrayal. But silence had carried us as far as it could. I stepped aside and let the door swing wide enough for Daniel to see me, clearly, my back straight, my eyes unflinching. He opened his mouth to speak, but I lifted a hand, not in defiance, but in calm control. "Before you believe another word," I said evenly, "you deserve to know the truth." Melissa's face twisted, a flash of panic she tried to smother with fresh tears. "Daniel, don't listen. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying." But I had prepared too long for this moment to let her drown me out. I reached to the small table by the doorway where I had placed a manila folder hours earlier, almost as though I had known this confrontation would come. My fingers trembled only slightly as I pulled out the stack of papers. "These," I said, my voice clear enough to cut through Melissa's theatrics, "are the mortgage statements for this house. For the last 3 years, every payment, $1,250 every month, has not come from you, Daniel. They have come directly from my retirement savings account." The porch went silent. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath. I could see Mrs. Turner craning her neck, her eyes gleaming with the hunger of someone who had just been handed better gossip than she had ever dreamed of. Daniel frowned, reaching for the papers as though they were burning. His hands, calloused from years of turning wrenches, trembled as he scanned the bank. Logos, the debits, the dates. His lips moved silently, counting, calculating, trying to force the numbers into a reality that would hurt less. Melissa's voice cracked, too shrill, too desperate. "That's not true. We've been giving her the money. She just pays it for us because the house is in her name. Daniel, tell her, you know we've been paying." Her words fell flat because Daniel's eyes, when they lifted from the paper, were already clouded with doubt. "Mom, what is this?" His voice was softer than before, stripped of fury, but laced with something far worse: confusion, betrayal. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's the truth, son. Every month, while you believed you were building your family's future, it was my savings that kept this roof over your heads. I let you believe otherwise because I wanted to see you stand tall, proud of your work. But I cannot stand by while lies eat away at what little we have left." The crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers spread like wildfire, neighbors repeating numbers, dates, fragments of what they thought they understood. I caught sight of Mr. Carter standing at the edge of the gathering, his gray hair ruffled by the evening breeze. At 70, he was still sharp as a blade, and for years he had been my financial advisor and one of the few friends I trusted. "Tell them, Carter," I said, my voice steady, though my heart thudded painfully. He stepped forward, adjusting his glasses, his tone firm but kind. "I've managed Evelyn's accounts for over a decade. I can confirm everything she's saying. Every mortgage payment has been drawn directly from her retirement fund. Not once has a cent come from Daniel or Melissa." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Melissa's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Her eyes darted frantic like an animal caught in a trap. Daniel's face crumpled, his broad shoulders sagging under the weight of a truth he had never suspected. 3 years, Daniel," I whispered, my voice cracking at last. 3 years of my savings while you believed you were standing on your own. I did it out of love, but I will not let that love be twisted into madness." He staggered back a step, the papers limp in his hands. His eyes darted from me to Melissa, searching desperate for an explanation that could undo what he had just seen. But there was none. The mask had slipped. And in the stunned silence of that summer evening, under the judgment of every watching neighbor, the first thread of Melissa's story unraveled. And once it began, there was no stopping the rest. Daniel stood there on the porch, the papers shaking in his hands, his world tilting on its axis. The crowd around us had grown thicker, drawn by the scent of scandal, the way moths are drawn to a flame. Melissa's face was pale beneath her carefully painted makeup, but I could see the calculation in her eyes, searching for another lie, another performance that might turn the tide back in her favor. I had given her the chance to stop. I had given Daniel the chance to see only what was necessary. But Melissa had pushed too far, and the truth I carried was heavier than silence could bear. I reached into the folder again, pulling out another stack of papers, this time credit card statements marked with red ink, rows of numbers that told a story far uglier than the first. "Daniel," I said quietly, though every ear in the cul-de-sac leaned closer, "the mortgage is only the beginning. For 3 years while you were working yourself raw, your wife has been drowning in debt, more than $28,000 in credit cards alone." Melissa's gasp came sharp and rehearsed. "That's a lie. You forged those, Evelyn. You're trying to destroy me." But the words were weak, brittle, crumbling in the air before they reached anyone's sympathy. Because I had more than numbers. I had photographs. I slid the first across the porch railing. A glossy shot of Melissa stepping out of a jewelry store, shopping bags dangling from both arms, her smile wide and careless. The second, a dimly lit photo from a restaurant in downtown Columbus, crystal glasses glinting in the candlelight, a bill folded discreetly but bold enough to reveal 3 figures. And another, still Melissa, laughing in the driver's seat of a rented sports car, sunglasses perched on her head, as if she were auditioning for a life she thought she deserved. The neighbors inhaled as one a collective hiss of shock. I caught sight of Claudia, the woman from 2 houses down, clutching her husband's arm as if the images themselves had burned her eyes. Mrs. Turner, once so ready to condemn me, now narrowed her gaze at Melissa with a predator's precision. Melissa's tears dried instantly, her voice rising shrill and defensive. "Those are old. I saved for those. Everyone deserves a little joy once in a while, joy." My voice broke the steel in it, trembling with the ache of restraint. "You called it joy while your husband broke his back at the garage. You called it joy while you told him you were struggling to make ends meet. And when your cards maxed out, when even the jewelry and restaurants weren't enough, you turned to our neighbors for help." I lifted another sheet, this one a simple, handwritten note. "Mr. Lewis," I called gently, "you know what I'm talking about." From the edge of the crowd, the old man shifted uncomfortably. 81 years old, his back still straight from decades as a police officer, but his face lined with guilt. He stepped forward, his voice gravelly, but clear. "She came to me last winter, said Evelyn was having trouble with her medical bills and she didn't want to embarrass her by making it public. She asked for $5,000. I gave it to her." The gasp this time was louder, sharper. Whispers surged through the crowd like a sudden wind. Neighbors turned eyes, narrowing sympathy, bleeding away from Melissa's trembling form, and turning toward me with something like horror and pity. Melissa spun toward Daniel, clutching at his sleeve, her voice breaking into a high-pitched wail. "It was for you! For us! I was just trying to help." But Daniel's shoulders had gone rigid. He looked down at her, his face pale, his eyes shadowed by a dawning understanding that no husband should ever be forced to endure. His hand slipped from hers, falling to his side as though even her touch burned him now. I stood straighter, my breath steady, though my heart was breaking. "Help Melissa," I said softly. "You spent thousands on clothes and jewels. You feasted in restaurants where the price of a single glass of wine equaled a week's groceries. And you stole from the very people who trusted us, dragging my name into your lies. That isn't help. That is betrayal." The crowd was no longer on her side. Eyes that had once pitied her now stared with open contempt. I saw heads shaking, lips pursed in disgust, neighbors backing away as though deceit itself might be contagious. And Daniel, my son, the boy I raised through hunger and heartbreak, stood silent in the ruins of the life he thought he had built. The crowd's murmurs hadn't yet died down from Mr. Lewis's confession when I felt the air tighten again like the pause before lightning splits the sky. Melissa's face was chalk white now, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her hands trembling as she clutched Daniel's arm. But he didn't return her grip. His silence was heavier than any accusation I could make. I reached once more into the folder I had carried like a shield. The final weight of it nearly buckled my hands, but I steadied myself. "As damning as her debts are," I said, my voice steady, but trembling underneath, "they are not the worst of it. Melissa didn't just squander money, she committed fraud." Gasps rippled outward, neighbors leaning closer as though the porch had turned into a courtroom. Melissa shook her head violently, strands of hair whipping across her face. "No? That's insane. She's making this up." I held up the documents, their edges sharp against my fingers. "These," I continued, "are loan agreements totaling $15,000. Each one signed with Daniel's name. But the handwriting is not his." Daniel's head snapped toward me, his brows furrowed, confusion hardening into dread. "What are you talking about?" His voice was hoarse as if dragged across gravel. "I'm talking about forgery, son," I whispered. "She used your name. She made you a co-signer without your knowledge." At that, a figure stepped forward from the circle of neighbors. It was Wallace, 72, retired lawyer, a man who had fought in courtrooms for 4 decades before settling into the quiet rhythms of gardening and chess at the senior center. Tonight, he carried a leather briefcase tucked under his arm, and his presence cut through the chaos like a gavel. "I've examined these documents myself," Wallace said, his voice calm but carrying the authority of years. "The signatures don't match Daniel's verified records. It's clear they were forged. If this were taken to court, the evidence would be irrefutable." A shocked murmur rolled through the crowd. Melissa swayed her knees, nearly buckling, but she forced herself upright, spitting words through trembling lips. "You're all conspiring against me. This is a setup." But her voice faltered as I pulled out the final weapon in my arsenal photographs. The first image caught her leaving the Continental Hotel downtown, her arm entwined with a man far older than Daniel Silver at his temples, dressed in tailored suits that screamed money and power. Richard Coleman, 50 years old. Owner of several restaurants, divorced, and very far from the hard-working son I had raised. The next photograph showed them laughing over champagne in a dimly lit restaurant, her hand resting on his chest with a familiarity no wife should show another man. Another captured them in the parking lot, kissing with a hunger that mocked every promise she had made to my son. The whispers from the neighbors turned into sharp exclamations. Some shook their heads in disgust. Others stared at Melissa with open contempt. Daniel's face. I will never forget it. It wasn't fury that broke him, it was devastation. His jaw slackened, his breath hitched, and for a moment he looked like a boy again, lost, betrayed, stripped of the world he thought was his. His fists clenched, then opened, then clenched again, his whole body quaking with the effort to hold himself together. "Melissa," he said. Finally, his voice low, dangerous, almost foreign to me. "Is this true?" She stammered, her eyes darting between the neighbors, the photos, the documents Wallace held, and finally back to Daniel's wounded face. "It's not what it looks like. I only met him for business. He was helping us," but her excuses melted under the weight of the images, the signatures, the silence of a community that no longer believed her. I looked at my son, then aching for the man who had worked his hands raw in the garage, believing every dime he earned was building a future. And I knew whatever remained of his marriage had just collapsed, not with a scream, but with the heavy silence of betrayal, made undeniable. Daniel's silence from the photographs stretched so long it became unbearable. I could see the storm inside him, the disbelief, the fury, the heartbreak tearing at his insides like claws. At last he turned his voice raw, stripped of the warmth I had known since he was a boy. "Melissa," he said, each syllable clipped, "look me in the eyes and tell me these aren't real." Melissa's lips trembled. She reached for him, but he stepped back as though her touch might infect him. "Daniel, please, you know how your mother feels about me. She's twisting everything. I only met Richard for business dinners, for networking. She's making it sound filthy when it wasn't." The crowd muttered. I heard Claudia scoff openly, Mrs. Turner whispering to the man beside her, "Business dinners, my foot." I felt the weight of the moment pressing on me, the urgency to peel away the last layer of Melissa's mask. My hand slipped into my pocket where my phone rested like a loaded weapon. My heart hammered as I pulled it free. "There's something you need to hear, Daniel," I said softly. My thumb pressed play and Melissa's own voice filled the porch, tinny but undeniable. "I just need to hold on a little longer. Once I get the house in my name, I'll divorce him and start fresh with Richard. Why should I waste my life on a mechanic when I can have everything I deserve?" The words sliced through the night like glass. Gasps erupted from the neighbors, their whispers swelling into sharp, disbelieving condemnation. Someone muttered shameless, another poor Daniel, and I saw heads, shaking eyes, narrowing the shift of a community's judgment, turning squarely against her. Melissa lunged forward, her voice rising to a desperate shriek. "That's edited. She cut it up to make me look bad, Daniel. You can't believe this." But he was already looking at her with eyes I'd never seen before, hollow, betrayed, as if something vital had died inside him. He raised his hands, pressing them into his temples, as if her voice still echoed there, poisoning every memory he thought was real. "I worked every damn day," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Every busted knuckle, every late night, I thought I was building something with you. And the whole time you were planning to throw me away like garbage." Melissa's tears spilled, but no one moved to comfort her. The neighbors had closed ranks. Mrs. Turner, usually quick to defend anyone who looked cornered, shook her head slowly, her face twisted with disgust. Even Mr. Lewis, who had once lent her money in good faith, crossed his arms and stepped back. The sound of slow footsteps broke the tension. From the sidewalk came Pastor Miller, 72, his white collar gleaming in the porch light, his cane tapping the pavement. His presence quieted the crowd. Even the whispers ceased. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice warm but steady. "Evelyn," he said, "no one should have to bear this alone. You've carried the weight of truth longer than most could endure. Tonight the truth speaks for itself." His words cracked something in me. For months I had felt like a soldier in a one-woman war gathering proof, while my heart broke in silence. And now, with my neighbors around me and the pastor's hand grounding me, I felt for the first time that I was not standing alone. Melissa's sobs grew shriller, her pleas emptier, but they fell on ears no longer willing to listen. One by one, the neighbors shook their heads, their verdict delivered not in a courtroom, but in the silent judgment of a community that had seen too much. Daniel lowered his hands from his face. His jaw was clenched, his voice steady now, carved from pain and resolve. "You wanted this house, Melissa. Take a good look around. It's not yours. It never was. And after tonight, neither am I." The crowd murmured approval, their silence broken now by nods, sighs, even a few quiet amens. And as Melissa crumbled in front of them all, I felt the weight in my chest lift, not because the pain was gone, but because at last the lies were no longer mine to carry. The porch had grown strangely quiet after Daniel's final words to Melissa, as though the night itself had drawn a curtain across her unraveling. Neighbors lingered in a hush, their judgment spoken, their sympathy now firmly shifted to my son. I could have let the silence stand, could have let the spectacle end there. But I knew the deepest truth had yet to be spoken, the one I had guarded closest, the one that explained everything I had done. My fingers tightened around the folder still clutched to my chest. For months it had held more than bank statements and photographs. It had carried the secret of my own mortality. My knees trembled as I stepped forward, the porch light bathing me in its pale glow. "Daniel." I began, my voice soft, but waited. "There's something I haven't told you, something I never wanted to say until I had no choice." He looked up at me, his face still ashen from betrayal, his eyes red-rimmed but searching. "What more could there be, Mom?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Haven't we had enough tonight?" I drew a long breath, forcing myself to steady. 6 months ago, during my annual checkup, the doctors found something. A tumor on my pancreas. It's advanced and the treatment is long, brutal, and expensive. $120,000, maybe more. Gasps rose again, but this time not with gossip. This time it was grief, shock, compassion. Even Mrs. Turner, who had always feasted on drama like bread, covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Daniel staggered back as if I had struck him. His papers fluttered to the ground, forgotten. "No," he whispered. "No, Mom. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me help?" Tears stung my eyes, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "Because, son, if I told you every penny you earned would have gone straight into those treatments. And Melissa," I glanced toward her shrinking figure, "would have found a way to bleed it dry before it ever reached me. I changed the locks not to punish you, but to protect you, and to protect the only chance I have to fight this disease." Daniel's face crumpled. He stumbled forward and collapsed into my arms, his body shaking with sobs that tore at my heart. "I doubted you," he wept against my shoulder. "I defended her. I thought you'd lost your mind, and all along you were saving mine. Please, Mom, forgive me." I stroked his hair like I had when he was a child after a nightmare. "There is nothing to forgive," I whispered. "You loved her the way you were meant to, with trust. That was never your sin. It was hers." Behind us, the neighbors' mood shifted. The same people who had peeked through blinds and whispered in judgment now looked at me with something entirely different. Respect, sorrow, solidarity. Claudia wiped her eyes. Mr. Lewis bowed his head, guilt flickering across his features. Even Pastor Miller, who had stood quietly at my side, spoke with a voice that carried across the crowd. "This woman," he said, placing his hand gently on mine, "chose sacrifice over self, even when it cost her the trust of her only son. That is love in its purest form. And now it is our turn as her neighbors, her community, her family in Christ, to stand by her in this fight." One by one, voices rose in agreement. Offers spilled out, rides to the hospital, meals delivered, prayers lifted daily. Mrs. Turner pressed my hand and whispered, "We'll be there for you, Evelyn. You won't go through this alone." In that moment, I felt the weight I had carried for months finally shift. Not vanish, for the illness still loomed, but lighten, because I was no longer carrying it alone. Daniel clung to me, whispering promises through his tears. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that no matter how dark the road ahead, we would walk it together, mother and son, hand in hand, surrounded by a community that had finally seen the truth. Daniel was still clinging to me when Wallace, steady and composed as always, stepped closer with his leather briefcase. He cleared his throat, the sound like the strike of a gavel against wood. "Evelyn," he said, turning so the neighbors could hear, "the time has come to formalize what tonight has revealed." From inside the case, he withdrew a sheaf of official papers stamped and notarized. "Melissa," he continued, his voice calm but implacable, "these documents confirm you no longer have any legal claim to this property. You are responsible for your debts, the credit cards, the loans, the fraudulent accounts. Every cent will be yours to carry and yours alone." The words landed like a final verdict. Melissa let out a strangled cry, but no one reached for her this time. The neighbors stood in silence, arms folded, eyes cold. For the first time in years, she had no stage, no audience willing to applaud her lies. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her purse, and she snatched it out like a lifeline. "Richard," she whispered, fumbling to put the call on speaker. Tell Daniel, this is all a mistake." But the voice that came through was cold and final. "Melissa, don't call me again. My ex-wife knows everything. My assets are tied up. My reputation is ruined. You're on your own." Then the line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Melissa's face drained of all color, her hand shaking as the phone slipped and clattered onto the porch. She looked smaller, then stripped of the arrogance that had once filled her voice. Just a woman, cornered, abandoned, and utterly alone. She stumbled down the steps, no one offering her an arm, no one softening their gaze. The neighbors turned their backs as she passed, and the night seemed to swallow her whole. Daniel exhaled sharply, as if the air had returned to his lungs for the first time in years. "It's over," he whispered, his voice ragged. Then he turned to me, eyes wet but clear. "I'm coming home, Mom. Whatever time we have left, we'll face it together." In the days that followed, he kept his word. He packed what little remained of his life with Melissa and returned to the house where he had once been a boy. The sound of his boots on the porch, the sight of his coat on the rack, it felt like a second chance, an answer to a prayer I had barely dared to make. And the community, once a circle of whisperers, became a circle of caretakers. Claudia arrived on Tuesdays with casseroles. Mrs. Turner, who had once judged me harshly, now showed up with her knitting and warm company. Mr. Lewis, carrying his guilt like a stone, insisted on driving me to treatments when Daniel's shifts at the garage kept him late. Even Pastor Miller organized a rotation of church volunteers to tend my garden so the tulips Melissa had crushed would bloom again in spring. Each gesture was small on its own, but together they wove a net of care strong enough to catch me in my darkest moments. I had feared I would fight my illness alone, but instead I found myself surrounded by neighbors by faith, by a son whose love had been tested and proven true. I often think back to that night, the night the locks on my door became the key to truth. It was brutal, humiliating, and devastating, but it was also the night lies died, and love, real love, was given room to breathe again. Because in the end, truth is never gentle. It cuts, it sears, it leaves scars. Yet it also clears the ground for something stronger to grow. My son and I lost illusions that night, but we gained something far more enduring: trust, resilience, and a community that refused to let us fall. And that, I believe, with all my heart, is what family truly means, by blood, by bond, by the hands that hold you when the storm finally breaks.